A big warm welcome to all participants from across the globe. I can see there is genuine and growing interest in the innovative ways to capture and communicate evidence on landscape restoration to ensure its integration in planning and policy processes. This session, titled The Symphony of Science and Practice, which is why I'm sure so many of you are here today to just see what do we mean by symphony of science and practice. We'll share evidence from the EU-funded Regreening Africa project and demonstrate the integration of multiple approaches infused by a variety of scientific disciplines and local perspectives to inform and adapt locally relevant restoration practice and policy. We welcome you to this session. Now, we would like to just see who is in the room. So if you go to your Wahuva app, you can see a poll where we would like to see who is in the room and tell us where you're from. So if you go to Wahuva app, you can see the questions in the poll and look at our, wow, 82% coming from Africa. We have some from Asia. So just go ahead and give us a feeling of from where you're calling in from. And there's even a second poll, which is what we'd really like to get on today, is how would you assess the effectiveness of science, practice, and policy working together? So from your experience, what has it been in terms of the effectiveness of science, practice, and policy working together? As this is obviously a key topic that we will be getting at today. So we'd like to use these polls in the Wahuva app, just under polls, to get some feedback from you, the esteemed participants, to try and make this as interactive as possible. So thank you so much for providing that feedback. Now let's get started. What are some of the driving research questions that we have for this session? So what we would like to collectively address and discuss today are what are some of the most promising ways of blending, melding, integrating multiple tools and approaches to deliver and support and monitor restoration. How can we better integrate science, practice, and policy to scale restoration? Does that question sound familiar from the poll? And then how can science be more effectively shared to really influence and inform decision making? So we have a session outline that I'd like to share with you here. So we'll have a series of presentations intermixed with polls and framing the need for evidence. We'll show examples from the Regreening Africa project. We'll talk about the multiple evidence sources impacting policy with examples from Niger and Kenya. Talk about this integrated approach to actionable evidence. And I really want to stress actionable evidence. It's not just evidence collection for the sake of collecting data, but really so it can be actioned, communicated. We hope to have an interactive discussion especially on how we can really scale this approach to make the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration a huge success. So again, a very warm welcome to all of you. I'm Lee Winawiki from C4eCraft calling in from Kenya, and I'm very pleased to introduce our first speaker, Mika Bourne, Regreening Africa Project Manager and Lead for Stakeholder Engagement, to just kick off this session. Mika, take it away.
Thank you so much, Lee. And I really just want to set the scene. I think throughout the last 2 days, and in fact, throughout this whole week, we've really been looking at the challenge of land degradation. And we know that it's affecting over 3.2 billion around the globe. And within Africa, we know that over 65% of our land, our agricultural land, is already degraded. The need for ecosystem restoration has really been highlighted, particularly this week, as the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration is being launched. And within the Decade strategy, we're really outlining the need to invest in research and to understand the best practices to implement and to restore our landscapes. But there is a challenge. There is already a lot of evidence and the need for more. But much of the evidence that is brought from research, monitoring, community, and other stakeholders has not been well integrated into either practice or policy in the past. And this really inhibits our capacity to scale restoration. So there is a few things that are needed. We do need to generate more robust, actionable, and appropriate evidence. But this evidence must be easy to interpret, it must be timely, and it must be accessible to those people that need to use it. And we need to take evidence into engagement processes so that that evidence is integrated into the planning, implementation, and policy. And a good framing for this is research and development. So research and development brings together the different stakeholders, the researchers, the donors, the development practitioners, the farmers and pastoralists, as well as the government, to work together to generate robust evidence across a large number of contexts, scales, and sites, to bring that evidence through structured stakeholder engagement to ensure that we're closing the learning loops, and to co-create and co-learn so that we can come up with solutions, and to bring actionable evidence into practice as well as into policy processes. So I'd like to share a little bit about Regreening Africa, which is a research and development program that also seeks to scale restoration and has action on the ground. Regreening Africa is a 5-year program funded by the European Union, and it's currently in its 4th year. It's extremely ambitious. It aims to reverse land degradation across 1 million hectares of land in sub-Saharan Africa, in the countries you can see on the map, and to benefit 500,000 households. The program seeks to achieve its ambition by incorporating trees into crop, communal, and pastoral lands, along with complementary, appropriate, and contextually appropriate other restoration practices. But to be able to deliver on its promise of both scaling and learning, it has quite a unique program structure. So Regreening Africa is housed within a research institution, World Agroforestry, where the project management and some of the different technical support areas are based. This provides technical support, capacity building, training, monitoring, and evidence through to the international NGOs that are working within the countries in various consortia. And you can see these different NGOs, INGOs in the map on the left. They're the ones that are scaling out to the farmers and working on the ground. And within each of the countries, there's a national oversight and coordination committee that both links the project to the national government to ensure that we're aligned, that we're looking towards national objectives and priorities, as well as ensuring that lessons from the project are scaled into future investment and policy processes. Overseeing the program is a steering committee that is headed by the European Union and also including all of the implementing partners to ensure that lessons coming from the project feed into future investments. So Regreening Africa really offers a huge opportunity. It offers a huge opportunity for scaling and for action on the ground. By September 2020, we'd already reached out to almost 300,000 households and reached over 400,000 hectares. By September of this year, we'll have updated figures on the reach, as well as the uptake and the level of adoption within these countries. But because of its reach, its scale, and the different contexts, it also offers a great opportunity for learning. Now, there's a lot happening on this map, but the key point is that each of the countries are progressing at different speeds. There are different challenges. Restoration requires different amounts of effort in each of these countries, and there's a different priority on different practices. For example, in Niger, it was very evident that without doing a lot of soil and water conservation, the other farmer-managed natural regeneration efforts would not have the same return. In Rwanda, due to smaller land sizes and a priority for high-value trees, there is an emphasis on tree planting. Within Senegal, we're prioritizing farmer-managed natural regeneration, and I hope you all know much about that from the sessions that have taken place through GLF. And in countries like Ethiopia, exclosures and enclosures play a very large role in the restoration process. And in each of these countries, there are diverse challenges that take place in addition to the challenges of COVID and those that are cross-cutting. The program is also creating and producing a large amount of evidence on many different areas. And today, some of my colleagues will be sharing particularly around land health, around reach and uptake, and around practices and inputs in nursery production. I would like to touch just briefly on another area, which is how we're bringing evidence into the policy processes and how we're supporting this in the different countries. So at the initiation of the program, we looked at the policy environment within each of the countries that we're working and held consultations to identify key and priority policy areas that we could contribute to in terms of as a program. For example, in Rwanda, we are aiming to support the establishment of an agroforestry task force. In Somalia, in Somaliland and Puntland, we're working on including farmer-managed natural regeneration in some of the existing policies. And I will touch on Niger and Kenya in greater detail. In Ethiopia, we contributed to the establishment of a platform on watersheds and agroforestry and the development of an agroforestry strategy. This is very critical for the program because we recognize that the enabling environment is incredibly important to support restoration and uptake of the practices on the ground. So a case study from Kenya. Within Kenya, the program has contributed towards the development of an agroforestry strategy through supporting technically in the stakeholder engagement and the reflection on evidence. And currently, the program is supporting the development of the National Landscape Restoration Conference, which will take place in July. By doing this, we're bringing together actors, reflecting on knowledge and evidence, and highlighting opportunities and bottlenecks that can be shared both with the government, the private sector, and other stakeholders. And because we recognize that we must all work together if we want to achieve Kenya's restoration target of 5.1 million hectares for the AFR 100 and Bond Challenge, and 10% tree cover, and recognizing there are many organizations, individuals, and partners that are working towards this goal. Another example from Niger. Last year, Niger was passed a very important presidential decree for farmer-managed natural regeneration or assisted natural regeneration. The decree was really important because it gave greater user rights to the community that were restoring the vegetation, the trees within their landscapes, and takes away some of the permitting systems and gives greater user right to these actors. Now, the program, along with other partners, has been part of a multi-stakeholder platform that has ensured that policymakers are going to the field to see what is possible and to see the potential by sharing the bottlenecks and the challenges, particularly around user rights, and then ensuring that there is continual momentum. So participants of the National Oversight and Coordination Committee that sit in high levels of government ensure that this stays as a top of the agenda and promote the national presidential decree. So these are just a couple of examples. And so I'd now like to pass back to Lee for the next poll. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you so much, Mika. In fact, you mentioned the need for appropriate, actionable, and robust evidence. Now we'd like to hear from the participants. Back to the Wahuva poll. Please let us know, what sources of information do you use as evidence in your decision-making? Because we are acknowledging there is such a wide body of evidence, from local indigenous knowledge to scientific evidence to case studies. So please go ahead and share your inputs on what you see as evidence, including stories, farmer perceptions. Now, while you're doing that, I'd like to introduce the next segment. We will watch a short video from the field on the Regreening Africa app, which is one of the innovative data collection tools developed and implemented in this project. We will hear from Mohammed Nabi of C4eCraft, Lahini and Dia from Senegal about their experience using the app. After the video, we will learn more about how regreening is using evidence and tools to deliver and monitor landscape restoration from Tor Vaughan, senior scientist of the Spatial Data Science and Applied Learning Lab at C4eCraft. So please, let's look at this video, Michael. Thank you.
Bonjour, c'est Lahine Ndao, animateur de la commune de Diokoul-Mbelbouk, en même temps le point focal de l'arrondissement de Katakel. Pour ce qui est de l'application Regreening App, nous permet de connaître l'exactitude des surfaces terrestres de nos paysans enrôlés.
Regreening Africa app is capable of recording field observation related to restoration activities. The app has some unique features, like it allows stakeholders and partners to collect data from the field, like the ownership of the land, polygon where restoration is taking place, the plot. It provides the plot size. It provides the name of the species which are being planted in the restoration area. It also records information related to the age of the tree, to the size of the tree. It also geotags the trees which are inside the restoration plot. The app has a couple of modules. So one module is tree planting, where a farmer is planting trees. Another module is called farmer managed natural regeneration, where group of people, individuals or group of people are managing some regeneration. Then there is a nursery module where we collect data related to nursery, like the contact person, what kind of species are available in the nurseries, and then when they are available, what is the price, and a couple of other good things which are part of the app.
Je me nomme Atamba Diouf, animateur du projet Regreening Africa dans la commune de Diaoulé. Je vais partager mon expérience par rapport à l'application Regreening App. C'est une application qui nous permet, en visitant la parcelle, on observe les bonnes pratiques de revêtissement. On peut ajouter là-bas comme commentaire. Par exemple, sagère améliorée et épandance des graines et tout ça. C'est une application qui nous montre aussi en géolocalisation la parcelle, qui nous donne la superficie, tant d'hectares la parcelle est. Donc l'application nous permet aussi de renforcer nos capacités et facilite le travail dans le terrain. Les avantages, on peut citer beaucoup.
Auparavant, nous utilisons notre téléphone uniquement sur l'usage des réseaux sociaux. Mais avec l'application, nous utilisons nos téléphones sur d'autres domaines, d'activité de travail. Et l'application permet aux animateurs d'être présents souvent sur le terrain pour éliminer le tâtonnement des surfaces terrestres des paysans. Vraiment, l'application est très importante pour le regreening application, et le gouvernement du Sénégal doit instaurer cette application pour permettre aux agents des eaux et forêts de connaître les surfaces reverdir pour le Sénégal. Merci.
Hi everyone, so I'm going to share a little bit, building on that video that you just saw on the Regreening Africa app, how we're using evidence and tools to deliver and monitor landscape restoration within the Regreening Africa project. So a key part of what we're doing is combining all this information that we're getting from the various tools that we use and the various methods that we use. And of course, given the challenge, and as Mika mentioned in her presentation, we're talking 8 countries here in very large areas and very ambitious targets in this project. we're not only planting trees, we're also reversing land degradation. We're some of these activities that are implemented on the ground that were highlighted in that video also help with climate change mitigation. We are increasing biodiversity and providing livelihood options. So that we need to use a range of different approaches for data collection and evidence to basically track whether we are achieving the targets that we've set. So the Regreening Africa app that Mohammed and the rest of the team talked about just now presents an opportunity in terms of citizen science data collection. It's being used by implementing partners, it's being used by extension agents, lead farmers, and also by scientists. And as you saw, it has these 4 modules around tree planting, farmer-managed natural regeneration, nurseries, and trainings. And one of the really exciting things about the app is that when the users of the app walk the boundaries of the fields where they are recording information about, for example, farmer-managed natural regeneration. So this example here is from Senegal, where we have a field boundary there on the right. And the users of the app then record the different species that they are managing within that boundary. So that gives us the location of the fields, it gives us the size of the fields, it gives us the species of the fields. It also gives us information on what the different trees are being used for. And in the case of tree planting, where trees are being planted on the farms. And this, of course, is also really important because planting trees or managing trees in FMNR is about much more than just making things green. It's also about the use of these species and what kinds of services that these trees provide within these landscapes. So what we're doing in the project, as you see at the top here of this slide, is basically keeping track of, for the different countries in the project, how many trees are planted, but also their survival rates, because that's really important. We need to know how this tree planting is performing and then address bottlenecks in terms of survival rates where needed. And then in the case of FMNR here on the right, we keep track of the number of farmers that are practicing FMNR in these countries. So that's sort of the Regreening Africa app and the citizen science. So then we have the other side of things, which is more what we as scientists are used to dealing with, which is more systematic data collection. And we have systematic data collection in the project on the biophysical side or ecological data. And we have systematic data collection in terms of household surveys as part of our monitoring and evaluation work, for example. And you'll hear more about that later. In the land degradation surveillance framework, which is what we use for the biophysical data collection on the ground, we have a lot of different indicators that we collect information on, including land cover, also including trees and shrubs and their species and biodiversity. Land use, we look at land degradation processes, such as, for example, soil erosion. And you'll see a couple of examples in a minute. And then, of course, soil health is really critical for land restoration. So unless we're building soil health, we're not going to be very successful in terms of also building the resilience of the system overall and restoring the ecosystem. So I'm just going to take you on a quick little tour of Rwanda and show you some examples. So here we have 2 maps of Rwanda, just as 2 examples of the indicators that we map as part of Regreening Africa. So on the left, we see soil erosion prevalence, where the areas that are red and orange represent areas where there's high erosion. And on the right, we have soil organic carbon, where areas that are light in color, kind of white and yellow, are areas with low carbon, and brown represents high carbon. We can see the forested systems there, east of Buhinga, for example, in southwestern Rwanda, have high carbon. And then I'm going to fly into one of the districts in Rwanda, in Bugesera, and look a bit more in detail. So here we have a map basically showing fractional vegetation cover for the year 2017, which was the baseline for the project. So this was the beginning of the project. And then we add other indicators to this. So we can look more specifically at tree cover. So we have the general vegetation cover, and then there's tree cover. And then we can look at soil erosion. So where is erosion occurring in this landscape? And if we zoom in a bit more, we can look at this within farmers' fields. So you see here a satellite image from April this year for a smaller part of Bugesera district. And then we have the erosion predictions here on top of that map. And you can see where we have in red erosion hotspots within these areas. So basically we can go from national scale down to very local farm level scale, and then we can aggregate back up. And we can combine this with the systematic household surveys that are being done in the project for baseline data collection. So you'll find there's a report on the Regreening Africa website where you can read about this in more detail. But the idea here is that both in the Regreening Africa app and in the monitoring and evaluation baseline surveys, we have collected information on the boundaries of the fields where the trees are and where interventions are being implemented. And that allows us to extract information from the land health maps that you just saw for Rwanda. We can do that for all the countries. So here we have Kenya, Senegal, Ghana, and Mali as examples. But we can extract this information and then combine it with information that's coming from the household surveys to really get at the social and ecological processes and the impacts of the project, both on the social aspects and on the ecological aspects. So in other words, we have this really at the bottom here, the data integration and analytics that happens across the structured data collection that's being done using the LDSF, the household surveys, and the Regreening Africa app. So we then conduct statistical analysis on these data. We develop predictive models, spatial models, and try to unpack the interactions between social and ecological indicators and processes. And this is really important because unless we understand these types of interactions, we cannot really design effective or understand what works or what doesn't work in a particular context. Then at the top here, all of this basically feeds into stakeholder engagement that we do with the evidence. So we co-design decision support tools, we use user-centered approaches for this, and develop interacting visualization and data of the data and the evidence together with the stakeholders. And this is, again, really critical because very often we develop tools and then we expect them to be taken up by people in use, but often that doesn't happen. So it's really important to involve the stakeholders in that process from the beginning, and also so that they can understand how they might be able to use the information that is in these tools and the functionality there to make decisions at different scales. So basically allowing us to do project level evidence and look at lessons learned, to look at the specific countries, and then all the way down to farm level and back up to project level. So that's essentially how we go about the evidence and tools in the Regreening Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that flying tour of Soil and Land Health Tour. Now I'd like to bring in the socioeconomic aspects of restoration from Judith O'Doul, Senior Agricultural Economist. Judith, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Lee. In addition to the other tools that we use, I would like to share with the whole world today some of the structured kind of surveys that we've been able to use to also monitor progress in restoration. So one of those structured ways is to do uptake surveys. So we have found uptake surveys to be very useful in generating information that helps us to tweak the implementation design, review maybe the interventions that we had initially planned to roll out, or probably even inform management decisions. And above all, we actually use most of the data generated from uptake surveys to also provide data that informs the donor reporting in terms of the indicators that we promise to deliver on. So we use these data generated to tell us how far we are actually from most of the indicators, like number of households taking up, and also the intensity of uptake, which we measure in terms of the acreage. Next, please. So why we think uptake surveys are very critical, we have been able to actually use some very innovative approach sampling technique called lot quality assurance sampling. This is a very cost-effective and it's a rapid way of generating data, and it also involves the partners in the process all through, including interpreting and understanding the data, and increases utilization of the information generated. More so, it helps us a lot to delve into the implementation sites, identifying areas that are probably not performing well, so that we can direct attention to such areas, and also areas that are probably doing very well that can act as learning sites. And this is, even though we use smaller, we divide the bigger program area into a small samples, so-called lots. This helps us a lot to actually look at each and every corner of the site to be able to identify which areas need more attention. So we take just a sample of 19 households, or between 19 to 20, and this has been able to give us a lot of information in terms of guiding the implementation. So what is required here is just to come up, decide on the threshold above which we say maybe an area is low performing or high performing. So for the regreening program, we decided on 67%. So we thought that was high enough to be able to push the partners to work towards that target. And it's also not over ambitious. Next, please. So here I'm presenting an example of where we might sometimes do like the usual surveys we do, where we just go into looking at the program area as a whole. You might think a program area is actually doing well, but ideally there are certain areas that need attention. For example, in Rwanda, where we found that exposure rate was quite high, around 71%, we were able to identify certain areas that needed attention, the ones that are highlighted in red. So this, by using this uptake survey method, we've been able to actually direct attention to those areas. Resources have been directed. It also generates a lot of questions in terms of why aren't these areas being reached vis-a-vis the other areas. So next, please. So in addition to that, we also want to see which of the scaling models are actually working better, and then which ones can we recommend for other areas. So we look at scaling, effectiveness of scaling in terms of the extent to which we can reach more people, and the extent to which the people reached can actually take up the innovations or the initiatives. So looking at the graph, we see the graph on my left, we see that ideally reach is very high in Rwanda. But then looking at Senegal, which is the third graph on the left, we see that few people are reached, yes, but more people, nearly all of those that have been reached are practicing. That means there could have been probably a lot of attention directed to a few people, and that is also not good for the project and in terms of impact. So in such cases, we've been able to advise the country implementing teams to be able to move actually further and probably revise their implementation strategy so that they are able to actually reach more people, and at the same time convince more people to take up practices next. So with the uptake surveys, they've been very critical for the implementing partners too, because we've been able to identify and maybe help them address specific challenges that are unique to the various countries. In the Sahel, the Senegal, for example, we've been able to identify low exposure rates, low levels of achievement against the targets, and lots of changes have taken place. The implementation strategies have been reviewed, where there's low tree density as a result of maybe relying on one particular practice. We've been able to, to encourage the country implementing partners to be able to include some other practices that are probably not directly related to tree planting to diversify the greening. Now, from the eastern part of Africa, in Kenya, for example, we've also been able to identify low exposure rates. And when we shared the results and discussed with the team, everyone was, asking why is the exposure rate? And right now, lots of things have changed. The implementation, the scaling approaches have changed. They have gone full blast into reaching more people. And we are hoping that when we do the next survey, we will see figures, increase. So is also for the integration of crops. We realize that tree planting or FMNR is being practiced, yes, but this is taking place more in the homesteads and not only integrating with crops. So here, the country teams have been able to also have demonstration plots to just demystify the fact that actually trees can be interacted with crops and still farmers can get benefits. In Rwanda, we have been able to identify issues that are related to policy, that only policy interventions might probably work better. So in a nutshell, that's how we've been able to use the results from uptake surveys to inform implementation and donor reporting. And we find this to be very useful because lots of changes have taken place, and this is for the better, to maximize impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judith. That was fascinating. Now let's make the link between the uptake and reach of regreening strategies, including tree planting, and see what's happening in the tree nurseries. So I welcome Sammy Carson, agroforestry scientist. Take it away, Sammy.
Thank you so much, Lee, for the opportunity. I'm most inclined to agree with Ravi's remarks this past day that actually we require approaches on restoration implementation that turn it not just into a practice, but also a recreation process. And nurseries are really the means that we can help really build local solutions that influence what trees we grow to improve livelihoods and the environment. Our experience in many African contexts already showed by Tor, where we are working, even where natural regeneration practices have been assumed in the past to really bring about rapid tree cover improvement, show that nurseries are still much needed to help fill many planting gaps and niches. Next slide, please. So we see nurseries actually serving at least three major goals, and these are on livelihoods, environment, and community organization support. The extent of this goal achievement is nonetheless based on farmer interests, stakeholder interests, and nursery managers' capacities. Farmer interests because we need to know the risk that really come with tree growing for farmers, the input requirements, but also linkages to market in terms of tree-based value chains. But stakeholders' interests, such as government support, private sector support, and especially for government support, especially in African contexts where several African governments have in the past relied on free seedling supply, then really not helping, nursery sector held by private individuals to actually take off. So issues around also, of course, nursery managers' concerns around profitability and demand issues of materials that they raise, sustainability elements of these enterprises, but also issues around access of affordable and quality inputs, such as, of course, seeds, but also cultural practices that go with really good nursery management. Next one, please. So in order to really help develop a more cost-effective tree nursery enterprises, the Regreening Africa project is supporting science-based approaches that use participatory data capture to really assemble evidence that can help turn around cultural practices and really better realize sustainability of these enterprises. We combine baseline assessments that we've already seen, focus group discussions with communities, nursery surveys such as with the Regreening app application that we have, but also databases such as a global tree knowledge platform to help inform and really sustain good practices. Next one. So far, our evidence shows that a focus on 4 intervention areas is really, really critical, really to have nurseries really serving an important role in restoration. And one of really the immediate lessons we're learning is issues around tree prioritization and use assessment from swarm surveys, where we actually see trees have a pattern and a fashion of use because the dynamics of tree uses according to product demand, but also levels of farm appreciation and generational changes where the balance between indigenous species and exotic species are always really something that we see taking a dynamic shift. Then the issue, of course, in terms of diversifying nursery production practices, in terms of really looking at seed sources, which is a major issue for a lot of communities, and where national seed supply systems are actually not working, but also the inability of local supply systems, which are really informally run, being unable to really manage a mechanism of germplasm exchange. But also, again, we look at production efficiencies, and what we see is a great variation. Immediately with the Regreening app, we see production differences between the nurseries we actually survey, that the nursery's use of key inputs such as seeds, such as media, such as water, such as containers for raising seedlings, really varying a lot in terms of best practice. And this really varies a lot between nurseries just because the management and the capacities within these stakeholders is really varying. But then also we, of course, thinking about how do we actually strengthen the local seedling supply systems. So all nurseries tending to just talk probably the same things, but also having very little exchange in terms of market information, but also information on input access, but also the regulation policy within especially challenges such as the free seedling input from a lot of the African governments. Next one, please. So here is an example of a customized kind of training support that Regreening Africa has been really developing and delivering to communities that we work with. And on my right here, you see actually a nursery really afflicted by use of poor quality seed, and all the labor and the material input and the effort that goes to this production goes to waste simply because a simple input went wrong. So we're looking at the good management practices, but also looking at the issues of quality seed sourcing, but also techniques around propagation issues around nursery entrepreneurship, because in the long run, communities want to turn these nursery enterprises as income sources, but also again, try to address issues around pest and disease, which are emerging simply because of the practice that is happening and because of challenges that are there. Thank you so much, Lee.
Thank you, Sammy. And now, bringing it all together, we will learn about what joint reflection learning missions are from Constance Neely, Lead Shared Decision Hub. Take it away, Constance.
Thank you so much, Lee, and it's a pleasure to be here. So we've heard about all this valuable evidence from Lee, from Tor, from Sammy, Judith, and how do we make sure that it is actually integrated into practice and policy and supports adaptive management to achieve the livelihood and restoration impacts that the project that Mika described has laid out. So one of the pivotal elements of Regreening Africa was for the design and its implementation has been the use of the shared methodology. This is a structured engagement process for evidence-based planning, decision-making, implementation, and learning and responding. The Shared Decision Hub is a collective of stakeholder engagement, behavioral specialists, and transdisciplinary scientists. And within the Regreening project, we use the shared approach, and the framework is just there on the screen to strengthen the linkages between science, practice, and policy. And we build and sequence relationships using tailored engagement and access to evidence to support the learning, the implementation, the policy dynamics, and the co-generation of solutions. Next slide, please. So Mika has laid out that this program is quite complex with all the different moving parts. So the Shared has developed a robust engagement process to address the learning and responding phase of the framework. And this allows us to bring experiences, to bring evidence directly in, and to jointly determine how to adapt and refine the annual planning. This is called the Joint Reflective Learning Missions. And in the next slide, just a very brief definition, that it is a reflective and learning process among diverse partners to examine multiple evidence sources and co-generate adaptive practice and policy solutions. And in the next slide, I just want to remind that the GRLM brings together practitioners, farmers, pastoralists, scientists, and decision makers to interrogate and reflect upon their evidence and experience to strategize for greater impacts. It takes shape in the form of field visits, interrogation of evidence that's available, reflecting on the implementation to date, scaling and leveraging opportunities beyond the project, and influencing policy outcomes. And if we look in a bit more detail in the next slide, I just want to describe a bit about these elements. So we start with the field visits. These are structured interaction among the actors that I've already mentioned, and definitely bringing in local authorities and national government to come to the farmers' fields and learn what is working, what is not working. Then we bring that information, that progress, those challenges, those opportunities in and place them on what we call the evidence wall, along with the citizen science that Tor has already mentioned and the video was about, and then the multi-themed data that's being collected and being co-collected. So we're looking at all of this information together to really assess what is happening in the system. And then we can reflect on what changes do we need to make in terms of the technical support, implementation, outreach, communications, or capacity development. And we also have in place tools such as outcome mapping, where we can clearly articulate those target stakeholders for change, those processes we would need to use to engage them, and the messaging needed. So in the next slide, I just want to show that typically, just in practice, these take between 4 and 6 days, the JRLMs, the Joint Reflective Learning Missions. So 2 to 4 days in the field, and then we go in for at least 2 days into a structured reflection workshop that I've just described the components of. Now, COVID took us to a new place, as we all know, so we went virtual this time. And there was a combination of field trips where they were safe and virtual field work, and then the virtual reflection workshop. And we were delighted to find that this was also very effective. In the next slide, I just want to remind, and it's also something that Tor alluded to, which is about co-designing how we get data and how we view data, because Shared and the regreening team want to ensure that the evidence is always presented in the most accessible format, whether it's pictures or stories, data visualization ideas, or maps. And so we pay close attention to that to ensure that we're all on the same page. And in our next slide, just a couple of quick comments about some of the key aspects of joint reflection, monitoring, and learning. First of all, it has created a neutral space where multiple colleagues can come together and honestly reflect on what is working and what is not working, and what are we learning from both practice and from the science. It creates a very structured dialogue so that there's a much deeper understanding of the overall system, and to unpack even behaviors and the implications of everything that we're learning. The monitoring is far beyond monitoring that is just for reporting. It truly is monitoring that makes a difference. And we continue to strengthen relationships and enhance interactions among this wide range of stakeholders. And so I think this next slide is my last slide. And I just want to reinforce that this is a readily scalable approach that can be applied in many contexts. It has been amazing for building relationship between research and development partners, for providing a space for co-generating actionable recommendations, for closing learning loops and facilitating adaptive management. And it uses skilled facilitators to structure and facilitate this ongoing dialogue. And with that, I think my session is ended, and I am delighted to introduce my dear colleague, Alex Mugai, who is the country program director for World Vision in Rwanda. And he is going to take some of the things I've said and show you what it's like in practice. So thank you, Alex. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Constance. I'm glad to share this with everyone who is following us. I want to just echo what Constance has just highlighted, but bringing this to a country level experience what we have seen happening in Rwanda. I have just I've put this into three major outlines, bringing community and NGO perspective to the joint learning and reflection missions, and then also what we have seen changing as a result of this practice, and then also looking at science and practice coming closer together. For Rwanda, as a experience of a non-government organization, World Vision is implementing these interventions across different districts with very different contexts. And we have had the opportunity to learn, to observe and see differences on opportunities and strength in the different contexts. So the mission is an opportunity for us to bring up these learnings and experience to a group of partners and stakeholders and reflect on such learnings and observations to come up with an improved or an informative action moving ahead. Similarly, the communities which we work with also get the opportunity to share their context-specific experience with a broader stakeholder group, still to learn from this experience and inform action moving ahead. What have we changed? What we have seen changing? A number of changes as a result of this practice, and many of the activities involved in the joint mission. Next, please. It has given an opportunity to the implementing team to be able to look back on annual progress which has been made, and then also an opportunity to the communities to express their gratitude and concerns. As a result, the project is reviewed and a clear roadmap of action is agreed upon for project success. We are also seeing a common understanding being built for project team on completed studies and their meaning and contribution to the overall project implementation. As a result of all these learnings, alterations are made through a consultative and participatory approach to better achieve project objectives. So another important practice, this is where we see government officials who are able to check and look at project details, definitely with the project team during these missions, and be able to assess the progress and then also check alignment to national objectives and priorities and suggest it accordingly. This is a very big opportunity for us to align project activities with national objectives and targets. So as a result of this, we are seeing a planning process which has become much more consultative and participative and responding to the real needs and the requirements of the project. We are also seeing increased ownership and accountability, where stakeholders are coming up during the forum to account for what they are assigned to be doing, and then also taking up responsibility for the next action. Again, also we are seeing a forum where we can make adjustment in implementation as a result of this process. Specifically for the case of Rwanda, we have seen changes coming in form of different tree species, where the issue came up, the issue of diversity, species diversity during these learning processes. And we've made improvements. We've made changes in order to address this challenge, to improve diversity of species in landscapes. We are also seeing the notes and reports which have been developed during these sessions being very helpful in community planning, most especially where we are having community members themselves participating in the missions and very much aware of how these reports and notes are coming, where they are coming from. So this has helped so much in community-centered planning. Again, I hinted about this alignment with the national objectives, which has also been improved as a result of joint learning and reflections with different stakeholders from government institutions and then policy makers to check alignment with the national objectives and targets. And definitely policy influencing through interaction with the different participants including policy formulators and then also the implementers. Next, please. And this is my last slide, where we are seeing science or practice coming together or coming closer together. So the project scientists, this is where we are seeing project scientists going down on the field to see the applicability of their scientific proposals in the communities. And we think this is a very important opportunity to come up with the proposals which are solving community problems. And then also making, we have seen science making more sense and even being demystified to the implementers and the communities, where project data, which has been collected during the implementation process, is presented to the implementing team and the communities. We are also seeing farming communities getting a unique chance to interact with the scientists on success and challenges behind scientific proposals. And this is where we see scientific proposals being developed and addressing the challenges affecting communities in relation to restoration. Again, it is a very big opportunity for lessons which are being learned and documented to be capitalized on in subsequent project planning process. So we are seeing as a result of all this, science solving the real problems, and then also we are seeing more appreciation of scientific work and its effective use in solving restoration challenges, and then an opportunity to develop proposals addressing community challenges. And definitely a big opportunity where we are seeing ourselves building evidence, which is going to help us inform future interventions. Thank you so much. Over to you, Lee.
Thank you, Alex. And I noted the phrase demystifying the science to enhance restoration, implementation, and scaling. I'm going to use that again. So now, bringing in the perspective from West Africa, I am so excited to now introduce Mamadou Koulibaly, Regreening Africa project manager from Oxfam, Mali. He will be speaking in French, so please use the translation in interaction. Mamadou, s'il vous plaît.
Mamadou Koulibaly qui représente Oxfam Mali.
Bonjour. Bonjour.
Bonjour. Avancez.
Je suis heureux de vous faire la réflexion et d'apprentissage. Hello, vous m'entendez?
Si, avancez.
Hello?
Oui, on vous entend bien, Mamadou.
Je suis heureux de vous présenter. Je suis heureux de vous présenter les résultats des journées de réflexion et d'apprentissage sur le terrain. OK. Donc, ceci, c'est une mission extrêmement importante. D'abord, en termes de définition, les journées interactives et d'apprentissage sur le terrain constituent une mission participative. En ce sens qu'elle regroupe un ensemble d'acteurs, à savoir les agents de mise en œuvre du projet, les chercheurs, le comité de pilotage qui est constitué d'un ensemble de services techniques de l'État et aussi du partenaire technique qui est ICRAF, ainsi que les décideurs, à savoir les autorités communales et les autorités régionales. Donc, c'est une mission est réellement participative, comme vous pouvez voir sur le terrain. Comme vous pouvez voir à travers cette diapositive. OK, diapo. Diapo. Donc, quelle est l'importance des journées de réflexion et d'apprentissage? Les journées de réflexion et d'apprentissage permettent une bonne compréhension des succès que l'on peut rencontrer sur le terrain. Ça constitue des opportunités d'apprentissage, en ce sens que ça permet une interaction entre les communautés, les scientifiques, les producteurs, le staff de mise en œuvre du projet, le partenaire technique. Et ceci permet en même temps de découvrir les opportunités, mais ça permet également de comprendre les défis et les contraintes. Alors, l'une des importances également est que ça apporte des solutions idoines aux difficultés liées à la pratique des technologies de reverdissement que l'on rencontre sur le terrain. Donc, c'est un cadre de renforcement, d'apprentissage, de cohésion entre différents acteurs. Et sur le terrain, ça permet aux paysans de comprendre que ce que fait le scientifique est fait pour lui. Comme on dit, la science n'a de valeur que lorsque ce qu'elle cherche et qu'elle trouve profite aux producteurs. Donc, c'est un cadre inouï de renseignement pour les communautés. Ça permet aux producteurs de comprendre que les scientifiques ne sont sur Terre avec eux. Les scientifiques ne parachutent pas du ciel. Donc, c'est un cadre de cohésion, un cadre de mutualisation des efforts. Ça permet aux chercheurs de voir la réalité du terrain. Ça leur permet de comprendre le niveau de mise en œuvre du projet. Ça leur permet également d'apporter des corrections par rapport aux défis que les communautés rencontrent sur le terrain. Alors, avec le projet Regreening Africa, la première année, en plus de la visite terrain, qui est normalement conclue par un atelier de réflexion en présentiel, et avec l'avènement du Covid, de plus en plus, ça fait 2 ans, nous sommes en train de faire l'atelier de façon virtuelle. Mais toujours la visite terrain se fait effectivement sur le terrain. Donc, les journées de réflexion et d'apprentissage, c'est vraiment une opportunité inouïe qu'il faut considérer. À titre d'exemple, je vais illustrer l'une des leçons apprises que nous avons eues suite à une visite à une mission conjointe et qui a permis de démontrer que les producteurs leaders formateurs qui constituent des agents au relais chargés de la mise en échelle des différentes technologies véhiculées par le projet sur le terrain est un point extrêmement important. C'est avec ces producteurs leaders formateurs que l'ensemble des technologies promues par le projet sont véhiculées au niveau communautaire. Et ces producteurs leaders formateurs permettront la durabilité des actions entreprises sur le terrain. Donc ça, c'est une leçon apprise sur le terrain à travers la mission conjointe de réflexion et d'apprentissage. L'une des leçons apprises également à travers la mission conjointe de réflexion et d'apprentissage est que les messages radio constituent des canaux extrêmement importants par rapport à comment véhiculer les opportunités, les options de reverdissement que le projet véhicule sur le terrain. Alors, aujourd'hui, quand je prends le cas particulier du Mali, il y a un partenariat fécond entre l'ensemble des ONG chargées de la mise en œuvre du projet, à savoir CRS, World Vision, Sahel et ECHO et Oxfam. Chaque structure a un contrat de partenariat avec ces radios et nous avons appris qu'à travers ces radios, les actions promues par le projet sont en train d'être véhiculées au-delà des zones d'intervention du projet sur le terrain. OK. Donc, en termes de recommandations, nous recommandons qu'il est important, extrêmement important de suivre, de poursuivre avec les missions de réflexion et d'apprentissage sur le terrain, parce que comme je l'ai dit tantôt, ça permet, c'est un cadre d'apprentissage. Et l'autre recommandation est qu'il faut veiller scrupuleusement à la mise en œuvre des recommandations issues de ces missions de réflexion et d'apprentissage. Et c'est d'ailleurs le cas au Mali. Et les notes issues des missions de réflexion sont beaucoup utilisées au niveau des structures techniques de l'État, telles que les eaux et forêts, telles que le ministère chargé de l'agriculture et de l'environnement. Donc, on dit qu'il est aussi recommandé qu'il faut favoriser cette collaboration étroite entre les producteurs, les chercheurs, les agents de développement. Donc, du point de vue des Oxfam que je représente, du point de vue également des communautés, la recommandation est que les journées de réflexion et d'apprentissage doivent vraiment continuer pendant la vie du projet. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Mamadou. Thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic. As you can see, my French is very poor. Thank you so much, Mamadou. This has just been such an enlightening session. And we have time for questions. So thanks to Miriam, who's been monitoring the Wahuva chat, we've selected a few really insightful questions. So if I could just get our panelists, our speakers to turn on their cameras, keep them on, and I'd like to, field you some questions. So I think the first question was about the Regreening Africa app, no surprise. This was from Carl. So Tor, how often are these data and tools updated to give real-time information including in the app? And in terms of the app, who are the main users within the country setting? So Tor, 2 minutes.
Yeah, so the data that's in the tools are updated a bit differently depending on what indicators we're talking about. So some of the data, such as, for example, rainfall and climate variables, are updated every day. And then there are some things, for example, the vegetation cover dynamics that we look at, they're updated bi-weekly, so every 2 weeks. And then other things like, for example, the soil organic carbon maps that you saw, the erosion maps that you saw, so the soil and land health, those we update every year. So that's on an annual basis. In terms of the data coming in from the app, this really depends on the use of the app. So basically the data is updated as people submit data through the app. So then it goes through a process where it's ready for presentation on the dashboard, which happens automatically as people submit data. So the idea is to try to keep it as near real time as possible, but of course with some checks in the process to make sure that the quality of the data is good and that we don't have things that don't make sense coming up on the tools, on the dashboards.
That sounds pretty real time to me. Now, Alex, there was also a question about what type of training does a user of the app require? So you've just led this massive campaign in Rwanda. Please, in 2 minutes, give us a feeling for the types of training needed in order for one to use and implement the Regreening Africa app.
Thank you, Lee. Actually, the way the app is designed, it doesn't need complex training. But what a user needs, he needs definitely to have be able to download the tool from the app, from the Google app, and then have it to the device you're going to use to collect the data. And then also you need some training on how to maneuver through the different modules which are on in the app. You need to know how to get to the ephemeral, be it tree planting. So those different packages which are there within the app. So those are basically the important thing. You need to have definitely know how to have the tool on your phone, and then also have basic information and knowledge on how to move through those different packages, depending on what data you're going to be capturing.
Thank you, Alex. And keep the questions coming on the Wahuva app, because we're going to try and breeze through them. Sammy, so much attention is on tree planting, tree diversity. There's a question in the app, in the Wahuva app, and you can tailor your answer. It's about how do you ensure genetic diversity? For example, when farmers source their own seeds, and even from germplasm resources, including farmer-managed natural regeneration. Go ahead, Sammy, 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Lee. This is a very critical question that actually has come out from our learning lessons picked from baseline surveys, but also farmer surveys. And also our observation, of course, with the nursery surveys. It's a major area of concern that actually a lot of farmers are poor sourcing planting materials and actually planting poor quality materials, locking them into a risk of a long-term enterprise that is not going to actually give them the products that they're actually anticipating to get in the long run. So this is a major issue, and compounding this problem is actually the depletion of tree sources, both within farming landscapes, but also within the forest, the remaining forest that we have. So it's a challenge that we deal with, but we have very simple techniques that can actually help communities and nursery operators collect quality materials. So we provide guides that are based on seed collection, but also training support on how to bulk seeds, so that they're actually promoting diversity, not only between species, but also diversity within species. So the intraspecific diversity of species. But I think this is the technicalities of the simple things that we do within a local situation. But this problem is actually also linked to the wider issue of lack of investment in this area, because really to establish good sources of germplasm requires government support, and to expect that actually tree nursery operators, small-scale nursery operators, would actually be able to invest in germplasm multiplication blocks or germplasm production areas is a long call, because they don't have the space, they don't have the resources, they don't have the land. So we need that government supposed to actually come in to intervene in terms of germplasm provisioning, but also we need external funding and support to actually establish good sources of germplasm to mitigate the problem. Otherwise, our forest sources are depleting, and also the remaining trees that we see on farm that are actually more diverse compared to what we have in forest is actually also depleting. Thank you so much, Lee.
I knew you would want to answer a question about germplasm diversity. So now, Miki, this is a very broad question that we got from the Wahuva chat. How can other countries in Africa, and I'm going to expand this beyond Africa, learn further and build on the work done in Regreening Africa? Go ahead, Mika.
Thank you so much, Lee. So I think there's a few ways. Regreening Africa is really aiming to share as much of the knowledge, outputs, tools with everybody, with the stakeholders. So Marion is putting in the chat our email address as well as the website. So you can access the website. There's a lot of resources there. All of the information that is coming out will be put up on the website. We also have social media to show snippets of information that's coming through, and that will all be within the chat so that you can see it. And then there's a few other ways I think that are important to get in touch. If you're in one of the countries that we're working, we're always looking for collaboration to building interaction amongst the different stakeholders. So you can reach out to us through the email, and then we can link you with the programs in the countries. And if you're interested in things like the Regreening Africa app, you can download it from the Google Play Store. In a few months, we will have dashboards online that people can access and see some of the information and learn more about in the countries that they're working. So I think there's a lot of different avenues where you can access the information coming out of the program and use it in your country where it's applicable, and feel free to get in touch.
Excellent. And actually, this GLF forum is such an amazing avenue to be sharing knowledge globally. I'm going to move to Constance next. So Constance, Mike mentioned in her opening that we like easy to interpret evidence. Easy to interpret evidence. Can you expand on how we would know if something is easy to interpret, and how do we modify it to make it easier to interpret? Thanks, Constance. And then I'm going to move to Mamadou after this. Thank you.
Okay, I'll be brief then. Thank you so much for the question. And I think that Tor really hit the nail on the head when he said we co-design how people need to see their data. So we actually do research to find out what data is most accessible to people. How do they like to see their data? Do they like bar charts? Do they like stories? And so we can better understand both how they like to see it, but also how easy is that to interpret. So those are two different things. So visually accessible, understandable, and actionable is our approach, but we go through this process with all of our stakeholders. Thank you.
Well, that was very easy for me to interpret. So Mamadou, please, despite the translation delay, I think this is a really important question and is what GLF is all about. So what are some of the challenges that you've experienced and that Regreening Africa has been facing doing research or doing restoration work in the drylands and Mali? Very dry where we're working. Are you able to answer this, Mamadou? And we'll give him a few moments of pause to allow the translation. It's about 7 seconds.
Ok, la question c'est par rapport à l'application Regreening ou bien c'est par rapport aux défis de façon générale? Sinon, si c'est les défis liés à l'application Regreening, je l'ai mentionné. Premièrement, il s'agit d'une question d'insuffisance en staff. Quand je prends le cas particulier au niveau des CRS au Mali, CRS présentement n'a qu'un agent sur le terrain qui est chargé de la mise en œuvre des activités sur le terrain, qui est chargé également de la supervision des mêmes activités sur le terrain. Alors, si vous dites à ce seul agent de s'occuper également du géoréférencement de l'ensemble des superficies reverdies, c'est un défi majeur. Et ce même défi se trouve au niveau de World Vision, qui aussi n'a présentement qu'un seul agent sur le terrain. Donc, la question de sous-staffing, comme je l'ai dit au niveau du chat, c'est cela. L'autre défi, il faut quand même avoir des smartphones ou des tablettes. Si vous n'en avez pas suffisamment, ce n'est pas évident. Le troisième défi que j'ai mentionné est en rapport avec la connexion Internet. Dans d'autres pays, ça peut ne pas être un défi, mais au niveau du Mali, c'est un véritable défi. Donc, ce sont ces trois défis que j'ai mentionnés par rapport, non pas à la mise en œuvre du projet sur le terrain, mais par rapport à la géolocalisation. Parce que le problème que nous avons d'importantes superficies reverdies, mais le fait que les superficies là ne sont pas géolocalisées, du coup, ils ne se trouvent pas sur l'application Regreening Africa. Alors que c'est l'application qui constitue, comme vous venez de le dire, la preuve matérielle que vous avez reverdie. Donc, quand il n'y a pas de géolocalisation, on a beau dire qu'on a reverdi, c'est un manque à gagner. Donc, c'est réellement un défi majeur que je voudrais souligner. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Mamadou. That was great. Thank you so much. Now, our final panelist question goes to Judith. So if we can remember at the beginning of this session, we asked a poll question on the Wahuba app. And we asked participants to rate how well we're doing in general, bringing together science, policy, and practice. And the average score was 3.6. So that's what the feeling is. So that's very, in my opinion, positive. So I would like to ask Judith to reflect on this and provide your insights on what we can do to bring that up to the 5 stars for the, in the coming years. Judith? Judith, would you like to respond? You can unmute yourself.
How well do we? Okay, sorry, I was a bit distracted by the translation. Well, if our average is 3.6, that is average. Is it a percentage? Is out of 10? It depends on. It depends on whether if it is out of 10, then I would say, well, not very good because we are still not midway. But it means that we are actually heading there. So we are not doing badly, but it means we still need to do quite a lot if it is out of 10.
It's out of 5.
Yeah. Oh no, if it's out of 5, then that's excellent. We just left with 1.5. So ideally, looking at what we have presented, I mean, the results are easy to interpret. I mean, looking at simple uptake surveys, working closely with the implementing, partners so that they are able to actually, so there's no delay in terms of getting information and then shelving it, but interpreting it there and there as it comes from the field. So I think that in a way has sort of enhanced or improved the utilization of the results. Yeah, which is contrary to what is always known of the scientists, that, okay, we first get the data, then we publish, it's peer reviewed. I mean, it takes quite a long time. So, I mean, I think that's actually what informs the rating. Great. Looking at what's all presented, for example, I mean, it's something you present, even the farmers themselves can, practice, and they are already seeing the bars, or they are seeing how well they are doing or how badly they are not. Yeah, so I guess I agree with the rating, actually. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. So with that, I really want to thank everyone for such an inspiring and engaging session. I can see the enthusiasm, not only for implementing restoration on the ground, but for exploring creative yet robust ways to track these restoration activities and bringing these data and evidence into the decision-making cycle of program managers, policy and decision makers, and let's remember the investors and the farmers we're working with. There's growing momentum around the restoration as we launch the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration this week, and with the UN Food System Summit this September. These present wonderful opportunities for multiple stakeholders to work together, share lessons learned and expertise to scale locally appropriate, equitable landscape restoration. I see we've really started tackling the 3 key questions we started this session off with around the most promising ways of melding multiple tools and approaches to deliver and support and monitor restoration. We've shared ideas on how we can better integrate science, practice, and policy so that the next poll, we're at 5 stars. We started off well at 3.6 today. And our final question around, we've really discussed suggestions for how science can more effectively share evidence with the multiple stakeholders to boost their ability to take better and more inclusive land restoration decisions. So let's take this momentum forward, build on these partnerships, innovations, and enthusiasm to bring evidence to bear for scaling landscape restoration globally. Now we will hear from Bernard Krabbe, Head of the Environment, Mainstreaming and Circular Economy sector at the European Commission within the Directorate General for International Partnerships. Bernard, as you close this session, please share your reflections on how these approaches taken in regreening could be useful for future restoration initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Et merci à tous les collègues et les intervenants d'aujourd'hui pour ces très intéressantes présentations et ces discussions extrêmement riches. Donc, mes salutations à l'ensemble des participants, en particulier nos amis africains. So we have had great presentations. It was really great to hear both voices from the field, from farmers, from extensionists, from policymakers, from scientists, from international organizations, from NGOs. And it's great to see how this project, Regreening Africa, has been combining these actors with EU funding, science, farmers' know-how, technical support from national administration, and simple technologies, including these digital tools, to deliver effective land restoration in 8 African countries. So it's really nice to see that this program has indeed created a symphony of science and practice, and the EU is very proud to be part of this symphony. And I will now try to play my few notes as part of our joint symphony. First, to tell you that indeed land restoration and sustainable management are very important for the European Union. It's really a cornerstone of our strategy for Africa. I think we all know land and its sustainable management are at the heart of Africa's development and are really at the crossroads of almost all of today's challenges, whether it is food security, development of sustainable agriculture, climate change, biodiversity, energy, but also very importantly, resilience, stability, security, and livelihoods. So that's why land is really at the heart of our approaches. It's also at the heart of the European Green Deal, which is an ambitious EU plan to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. And we believe that working on land, working on sustainable land management, we have the opportunity to build back better from the COVID pandemics and increase resilience, build more sustainable and resilient food systems and development pathways for the future. So that's why the EU is a strong supporter of this UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And we are very committed to strive for ambitious international agreements at the upcoming summits. Lee, you mentioned the UN Food System Summit, which will be very important. I should also mention the Climate Change Conference of the Parties, and also very importantly, the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, due to take place in China later this year or early next year. In all these fora, the EU will work hard with partners to try and reach ambitious agreements, because we really believe we need these ambitious agreements. There is an urgent need to step up action on all these fronts. And again, land is at the heart of these things. That's also, and to illustrate this, the commitment of the EU, our president, Ursula von der Leyen, herself in person made a very bold commitment at the last One Planet Summit in January in support of the Great Green Wall Initiative. And I think, and that's the second part of what I want to tell you, in this future support to both the decade for ecosystem restoration, for the future support to the Great Green Wall, we believe we have a lot to learn from Regreening Africa, and we need definitely to build on what works. We are, as I said, a very proud supporter of the Regreening Africa program. This is a real successful example of how we can bring multiple stakeholders together, building on the strengths of each and everyone in order to deliver. And I think this session is really an illustration of this nice partnership. First thing we have learned, of course, we need to work at the grassroots level. We need to anchor our efforts in local dynamics and local communities. It's really the farmers and the herders that are the custodians of the land. It's really them, the driving force of all this endeavor. We have also learned that simple solutions work at the level of community. We need to build on local knowledge, but also enrich local knowledge with science. We have seen as well that having the right technical approach is not sufficient. We need also to understand farmers' constraints and motivations. And this is where you have adequately used social science to support the endeavor. We very much believe in agroecological approaches and in the different techniques and approaches that the project has supported. We believe that you have developed, you are not the only one, there are other examples, of course, but you have developed a range of options, technical options on which we can build for both the Great Green Wall and the UN Decade. These are cost-effective solutions, and the cost is important. I think in the past, we have spent millions in land restoration, not always successfully. We have demonstrated here that this is feasible in a cost-effective way. We need as well to stimulate this, we need to bring on board a diversity of stakeholders. So we need to demonstrate that land restoration pays. It's very important to demonstrate returns on investments. And that's how we will bring private investment on board. And I'm looking at Lee because maybe the clock is ticking, isn't it? How much time do I have?
We are 1 minute over session.
Okay, so I will really conclude. So again, there is a lot to build upon in order to achieve the ambitious roadmap that we have ahead of us. And we really, the EU wants to build on the success of Regreening Africa and the knowledge of Regreening Africa to do this. We really hope that the symphony of today has been an inspiration to you. For me, it was a real inspiration. I think it can motivate us to tackle these huge challenges we are facing. So I wish you all a successful restoration decade, a nice morning, a nice afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. And let's continue singing together to really make life, to make this world a better world. So over to you. Thanks very much to all for participating in this session.
Thank you so much, Bernard, for the absolutely inspiring words. I have very warm thank you to everyone who is attending this session on the Symphony of Science and Practice. We look forward to restoring together. Have a great rest of your GLF. Thank you.